It's interesting and quite a bit scary how much stuff is just absorbed by us through our culture as statements of fact that we may never even think to question. I'm a fan of Doctor Who, the British TV show, and I was watching this episode that was made some years ago called The Doctor Dances. It's set at the time of the London Blitz, and it ends with a completely happy ending. The normally cranky doctor is just jubilant, and he shouts out to everyone,
"Right, you lot, lots to do. Beat the Germans, save the world, don't forget the welfare state."
When I heard that, I was like, yeah, beat the Germans, save the world, don't forget the... What? I grew up at a time where I came of age in the 80s, and so I had only ever heard welfare state used as a pejorative, as an insult that one politician would hurl against another. But here the doctor was, and he was acting like this was a great thing, almost on par with saving the world. What? The welfare state in Great Britain had its origins, just like this episode of Doctor Who, in the Blitz, in the time of Great Britain being in World War II. Now, Great Britain had already gone through a difficult time, just like the US with the Great Depression, a time of extreme poverty that they called the Hungry 30s. Then you had the Blitz, the attack on Great Britain by Germany. And many things were unveiled through that, the extreme inequities in the society. Because not unlike the US right now during the pandemic, it was easy to see that, yes, they were in the same ocean, but they were on very different boats. Some people were surviving the bombing down in the bunker of the Savoy or out at their country estate, while other Britons were trying to survive underneath a piece of corrugated steel in their backyard or down in the tubes, the subways of London. Added to this was a feeling of unity with each other. They were all fighting a common enemy. And out of that arose an ethic in the country that prioritized the lives of the citizens over business interests. They knew that they would have to rebuild their country, and to use a recent phrase, they wanted to build back better. They didn't want to go back to what they had already experienced because they were able to see now how unfair it was and how it was not good for the country as a whole. On top of that, many of the leaders in the country felt that in order to win the war, that they needed to be able to give something for the people to fight for, an alternative to life in Germany. And I think that as liberals, I think there's a little detail in here that we could learn from. Because I admit, when I first read that about how they needed to provide an alternative, I was kind of like, well, Great Britain wasn't taking people and putting them in concentration camps and killing them. Wasn't that a good enough alternative? And I think that we liberals often think like that, but the thing is, you need more in order to have revolutionary change, and in order to become the country that you want to be, you have to have more than simply saying we are not this evil that exists over there or that existed before us. You have to create a better vision, and you have to come up with something that will provide a better way of life for everyone. Also, in Great Britain, it wasn't just the people, it wasn't just the soldiers who were fighting the enemy. It was also the people who were at home helping with the war effort there, making tremendous sacrifice. People felt that there needed to be a reward at the end of this for all of this work and sacrifice. So in 1941, during the Blitz, as the bombs were falling, The government commissioned a committee and a report to try and brainstorm, envision what this better world could be that they would rebuild. They pulled together people from the different civil service agencies, the Department of Labor, the Department of the Treasury, the Department of Health, the Department of Customs and Excise taxes. They brought all of these people together to do this big brainstorming. And the person that they put in charge of it, the person who was the chairman, was a man named Sir William Beveridge. He was an economist and a liberal politician. And they worked collectively, but much of the credit is given to Beveridge for drafting this and kind of being the visionary behind it. And this committee started their report, their 300-page report of recommendations with 3 guiding principles. The first guiding principle was that they were not going to be limited, they were not going to be restricted by sectional interest, or what we might call interest groups or the different agencies. They needed to think bigger than that. And in the words of William Beveridge, a revolutionary moment in the world's history is a time for revolution, not for patching. Their second guiding principle was that all of these proposals were coming out of the idea that they needed to look at everything holistically. They needed to look at all of the big problems in society. What was it that served as barriers to creating a better world? And then they named them. They said that the 5 great evils were squalor, ignorance, want, idleness, and disease. Their third guiding principle was about how they were going to do this, what they felt was the way to achieve this kind of meaningful, revolutionary change. And they said that social care for citizens must be achieved by cooperation between the state and the individual. The state should offer security for service and contribution. The state, in organizing security, should not stifle incentive, opportunity, responsibility. In establishing a national minimum, it should leave room and encouragement for voluntary action by each individual to provide more than the minimum for himself and his family. It was the 40s. They were still operating under certain sexist assumptions, namely that the head of the household would be a man, which incidentally wound up being kind of problematic a little ways down the road because so many of the women had been widowed from the war. But it was a very good start. So in 1942, they released their report, the Report on Social Insurance and Allied Services. But it came to be known simply as the Beveridge Report. And if you go looking for it now, if you put in the Beveridge Report, that's what it's called. That report has been called the most important 20th century document in British history. And it was a whole comprehensive program, not just something that would help the poor in times of crisis, but a program that was for all Britons, that covered their health and education and what would happen if they were aged or sick. A family allowance and full-time employment. That was also part of this, was the government taking responsibility for making sure that full-time employment would be available for all. The reaction at the time was overwhelmingly positive. A survey taken around that time showed that like 86% of the country fully supported it. In general, wherever there was any concern, it was about how are we going to pay for it, but not the idea that they should have something like this. This was fully supported by the Labor Party, but the Conservative Party too was supporting this. Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister, and he put out a radio statement talking about his plan for after the war. And he used the term that many of us may have heard of cradle to grave, talking about the health care and the insurance for all of the citizens. He said, healthy citizens are the greatest asset that any country can have. And this was revolutionary. It transformed the country, and it has evolved over the decades since then as they learned different things, depending on what was happening economically in the country. And of course, there would be some little movements depending on which political party was in power. But by and large, the welfare state is still a big part of Great Britain. Those guiding principles of the Beveridge Report have become part of the culture itself, and they have endured. So here we are at what could be a pivotal moment in U.S. history. We are standing amongst the rubble of our own fight for democracy here in our own country, as our country suffers from this deadly pandemic that has taken so many lives. And this pandemic, much like the Blitz, has unveiled so many of the inequities in our country, as well as things that we really need. Looking at the situation that so many of us are in as we attempt to educate or help with the education of our children at home, we have to face the fact that daycare, but not just for little kids, is an integral part of our economy that we have just allowed to take the form of public schooling. And so what would it mean if we expanded that and had some kind of a universal childcare for all ages? But I'm not here to try and argue what should be in our version of a Beveridge Report. But I absolutely am arguing that we should have some type of a guiding document that will lay out a plan for how to transform our society. A movement to set up a functional American welfare state that is good for the citizens and good for the economy must be informed by and rooted in dismantling white supremacy. Because white supremacy is what got us here. White supremacy is what has created this system. White supremacy has shaped how we view even the very word welfare. As Sir Beveridge said, a revolutionary time in the world's history calls for revolution, not for patching. Following the lead of those who have been studying this and living this is our path forward. And here's a challenge for you and me. Building solidarity is a necessary part of building a national welfare state. You got to have that. That's why it was able to work in Great Britain. We have to begin speaking of our vision and maintaining connections where we can. Again, I'm not talking about giving up your principles. And if you are someone who has been victimized, I absolutely am not saying that you need to be making friends with your oppressor. But when you are in a situation, or again, one of those small collectives that make up your world, to be able to make some connections, that's going to be what will enable us to create this national solidarity. And talk of the vision and challenge the misconceptions. When someone speaks disparagingly about welfare, point out that, well, actually welfare is literally in the preamble to our Constitution as being why we even have a Constitution and why we have this government, that it's to promote the welfare of the citizens. We are stronger as a collective than we are as individuals. That's why we have this nation. And as a collective, as a nation, we can create a society where everyone is able to get what they need. we will emerge from this grim period of fighting for democracy in our own country and fighting a deadly pandemic that has taken so many lives. We will emerge. And as that saying goes, if you have to go through hell, don't come out empty-handed. I believe that that applies to a country as well as to us as individuals. We have learned so much during this time period. Let's use the wisdom that we have earned that cost so much. Let's move forward, not just to try and fix what has been broken in the last 4 years, but fix what was broken before that, or fix what was working exactly as it was intended, but the intention was not good. One of the prices of American exceptionalism is that it often means we don't look at other countries and say, oh, hey, they did a thing and it was a good thing and maybe we can learn from them. But we can, and we can build a better country. So, right you lot, lots to do. Beat the fascists, save the world. Don't forget about the welfare state.